Welcome to the United States of Addiction, where we make up less than 5% of the world's population and yet consume over 75% of the world's medication. We are drugged and over-medicated. Our culture is drawn to addictive behavior, and drugs have become our favorite pastime. Now, this isn't about illegal drugs. This is about the drugs we get from our doctors, drugs we get from our pharmacies, drugs we trust are safe to consume if they're on the market, legal medicinal drugs. Prescription drug abuse is an epidemic that has been greatly overshadowed by society's stigma of drugs, as well as concealed by our pharmaceutical industry. We've started a war on drugs in a multitude of other countries, and yet somehow forgot to touch on the war on people coming from our own industry and attacking our own people. Here in the United States of Addiction, we've all been lied to, and we are all at risk. My name is Samira, as you may have heard some people yell out as I walked out. I am going into pharmacy school in the fall. I work in clinical and retail pharmacy, and I've been a lifelong consumer of medication, as we've all been. We've all taken a Tylenol or Advil or cough syrup or stronger or prescription pills. And that's fine. Medication is supposed to improve our quality of life. We should use it. Yet too often, we're misinformed about the drugs we think we know, the drugs we call safe. Too often, our health isn't as valuable as the most profitable medication that can be prescribed off of us. Now, don't get me wrong. The goal here today is not to smear the name of any healthcare industry. We've achieved historic feats in this name of medicine and science that have saved millions across the world. But the greatest healthcare feat we have yet to achieve is a society of informed people. I love this profession. I wouldn't be up here if I didn't. I'd probably be in bed watching Netflix right about now. But I love it because it pushes me to be better than I am, and I watch it enrich lives every day. But from $300 diabetic supplies to dangerously addictive pills, I also watch this industry take advantage of us every day. If we want to take back control of our system, we have to understand what gave our power away. Now, our industry encourages our culture of drug dependence. All you have to do is turn on the TV to see it. And we all love those commercials. Do you feel exhausted and worn down all the time? Do you find trouble motivating yourself to do even the simplest of tasks? Do you have trouble sleeping and even more trouble waking up?
Do you get cold when it's chilly? Hungry if you don't eat?
That's my favorite. If I were to ask everyone in here the same set of questions, everyone would answer yes at least once. I call these the symptoms of life, and these commercials are deceptive because they can paint something that's normal and natural as part of an illness that you need this magic pill to fix. Their mantra, there's always something to fix about yourself, and pills exist to fix you. Now, I used to take about 2 painkillers a day. I was never in any physical pain, but I'd feel stressed and pressured by silly things, and I'd choose the pill because it was a quick fix. As my tolerance grew, 2 became 3, then 4, then 6 pills a day. It was like my caffeine, but it was always a temporary fix. It never dealt with the root of the problem, and it was never quite enough. When you take a step back from the thousands of manipulated commercials we're bombarded with, you see a different side to these drugs. Prescription drugs harm more people in the United States than illicit drugs do. According to the DEA, this is the number of people that die each year from cocaine, heroin, and marijuana abuse combined. By contrast, prescription drugs kill almost consistently twice the number of people each year. The CDC reports that someone in this country dies of prescription drug abuse every 19 minutes. That's a little over 500 people a week, the size of this audience. And that doesn't exactly make sense because our legal drugs are supposed to be our safe drugs. If you take a look at our FDA approval process from left to right, they undergo a strenuous application process and multiple clinical trials before they're approved by the FDA. Now, this process can take over 10 years and over $2.6 billion per drug. And out of all the drugs that started, only about a handful make it out. So that's a lot of bad drugs that get weeded out. That's our system working. Yet the FDA's drug recall rate is at an all-time high. We have more drugs than ever being approved to be on the market, only to be deemed unsafe and removed shortly after. So my question is, what are the loopholes to our system? How did they slip past the radar? Now, keep in mind, there's a lot at stake for the drug companies in this process. That's a lot of invested time and money that can go to waste for these for-profit companies. So even if they realize their drug isn't as safe or effective as they wanted it to be, they have to push it through the system somehow to turn a profit. They do this by using what I like to call the 3 golden rules of pharma. These are the loopholes these companies have found across our system that allow them to misinform us and turn a profit. Golden rule number 1, regulate the regulation. Now, the FDA controls the fate of all proposed drugs. As a drug company, you want a very good relationship with the FDA. This means giving money to review board members and congressmen that influence drug legislation, as well as paying above and beyond the required drug fees in order to speed up the approval process for your drug. The FDA's budget exponentially grows each year, and pharma contributions account for over 80% of that growth each year. It's easy to control regulation against you when you basically own the agencies. Take antidepressants, for example. Now, for millions, these drugs are a miracle. For others, not so much. After concerns about antidepressants inducing suicidality and violence in patients, the US FDA held a hearing in 1991 to discuss the safety of antidepressants. What troubles me is that the majority of the 41 FDA review board members in that hearing had some financial ties to the companies that created these drugs. There was such a conflict of interest that they released a statement titled "Conflict of Interest," that the hearing will deal with no specific issue dealing with a specific product or sponsor, meaning that the drugs are going to be looked at in very general terms. No one drug or company is going to be targeted and possibly regulated. Rule number 1, regulate the regulation. Rule number 2, publish only the positive. Now, before approval, the FDA needs to see 2 large-scale positive studies supporting that a drug is an effective treatment versus a placebo for a particular ailment. Naturally, they don't want to approve a drug that fails at what it's supposed to do. So 2 is the magic number. And since drug companies fund and conduct their own clinical trials, they control which studies they publish and which studies they bury. This can be particularly dangerous. Say we conducted 100 studies and 98 of them showed our drug had seriously disturbing side effects. We could legally only disclose the 2 studies we favor. That is being reckless with our health, and it's not exactly hypothetical. If you look at the drug Prozac, in 2005, internal documents about side effect information and clinical trial data about the pill Prozac were leaked to the media. These documents were dated a year after Prozac was approved to be on the market, and they showed that patients on Prozac are 12 times more likely to commit suicide than patients on other major antidepressants, and 8 times more likely to commit intentional injuries. Prozac had been on the market for almost 2 decades at that point without any warning labels for the side effects that its company knew about but chose to conceal. This is a drug that was also marketed for children. Now, today, the FDA does require suicide risk warning labels on all antidepressants. Take the birth controls Yasmin and yasmin were found to increase the risk for blood clotting 2 times regular birth control pills. Patients on the drug Zyprexa, an antipsychotic medication, are 3.5 times more likely to develop diabetes than patients not on the drug. Side effect information that was conveniently left out of the original publication. And this is particularly dangerous because adverse effects to medication is the 4th leading cause of death in the United States after heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Rule number 2, publish only the positive. Rule number 3, involve everyone with a financial interest. Now, it may take a village to raise a child, but it takes an army to push forward a drug. And approval is only half the battle. The other half is selling it. In such a crowded market of extremely similar drugs, you have to make your drug more appealing for physicians to prescribe. You can bribe doctors with free dinners, trips, dinners, money, more dinners, in order to approve your drug over others. You can pay insurance companies to establish your drug as their preferred drug for a diagnosis. You can also reward individuals willing to push forward your drugs with high-ranking jobs at the very drug companies. For example, the revolving door phenomena, where you have FDA officials ending up with high-ranking jobs at the very drug companies they helped approve drugs for. If you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM for short, this is basically the diagnostic standard for every psychiatric disorder recognized in the United States. Basically, a mental diagnosis has to be in this book before medication can be approved for its treatment. And what interests me about this is when you look at the task force team that puts together this book, each version, over 70% of them have financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. The more diagnoses they create that existing drugs can be marketed for, the more money that psychiatrists and drug companies alike can make. Rule number 3, involve everyone with a financial interest. We have a system that is harming everyone that is on medication and everyone that knows someone that is on medication. We're encouraged to depend on drugs for our problems and then misinformed about those very drugs. So where do we go from here? Well, for starters, we have to break the golden rules. From a policy perspective, this means regulating the companies and their contributions to the FDA, publishing all clinical trial data and adverse effects, as well as only involving individuals known for health and safety interests, not money interest. Our medications should not be tied to someone's financial agenda. There should be no conflict of interest when it comes to public health. Now, if you look across the globe, we're the only ones facing this problem because of how we approach health. Now, while our process is considered a gold standard across many nations, on our system, we need to prove that a drug is tremendously harmful before it can ever be regulated. In addition, Missouri is the only state in the United States without a prescription drug monitoring program. That is being reckless with our health. On the other hand, if you look at the European Union, they follow a very precautionary principle. If a drug has even the slightest potential of harm, protective and preventative action is taken. They refuse to be reckless with health. That is where we differ, and that is the change we need to make. Now, we can crack down on these companies and regulate the system all we want, but we need to take a moment to look at ourselves, because from a cultural perspective, we allow these loopholes. We feed into the drug commercials and the drug dependence culture. We don't ask enough questions about our medications, and we're quick to exchange a pill for a problem for a pill. No one is happy about paying absurd prices for medication they don't know all the risks for, but not many have the incentive to protest. It's only when a drug is harming someone close to us or is costing us a fortune that we care about regulating it at all. That is being reckless with our health. Now, of all the major players of this game, we, the citizens, stand to lose and gain the most. How are these drug companies powerful? Well, they create our drug supplies. How are we powerful? We're their customers. And like any good business, this industry has to cater to its customers in order to survive. And we have more power there than we truly realize. If you look at the EpiPen controversy, you may have heard about it, spanning a couple years back. It's when the price of this life-saving epinephrine injectable increased by over 600% because its company, Mylan, no longer had competition in the market. I want to walk you through a visual timeline feed event of the entire scandal. Now, at the beginning, the reaction was very slow. The people that were affected spoke out, but not nearly enough. More price hikes went up. More people couldn't afford the medication. Even EMTs had to use syringes instead of the medication because it was too expensive to even use professionally. Now, by July, online petitions on websites like change.org started for Congress to investigate the price gouging. And then the media picked up the story, and from there, it blew up. By August, 20 tweets a day increased to 500, 2,000, eventually reaching over 10,000 tweets a day from doctors and consumers alike, sharing their outrage and calling for change. In the aftermath, Mylan released a cheaper generic, and CVS competed by creating an even cheaper generic. In essence, we demanded a new supply, and the industry rose to meet our demands. And the EpiPen scandal is by no means one of a kind. And if you look across our history of medicine protests, you see the protests for affordable health care to cancer drugs. You see the protests against the overdrugging of veterans, against the use of psychiatric drugs on children, against affordable access to AIDS treatments. There is not a shortage of battles we have taken on and have yet to take on. And with social media, it's easier than ever to spread the word and educate the community around us. In the words of John F. Kennedy, only an educated and informed people will be a free people. We have to understand how our culture impacts this industry and how we can protect ourselves. And I suggest we do this by creating our own set of rules. Just like they have their rules, we get to have our rules. And I call them the United States of Recovery rules. Before taking any medications, ask yourself these set of questions. Number one, do I need this drug? Is this drug treating a physiological problem or simply a symptom of life problem? Rule number 2, do I know the side effects of this drug? Research your medication. Ask your doctors about the side effects of the medication. Look under studies published by the FDA, under the European Medicines Agency, the Daily Med. There's even an application released by the FDA called the Orange Book that contains side effect information of almost all FDA-approved drugs. Use your resources. Number 3, is this drug the best possible option for me? What are my alternatives? And with the help of a healthcare professional, analyze if the benefits outweigh the harms for you personally. We don't have to be reckless with our health. Now, the United States of Addiction is in their best interest. I mean, they'll have customers for life that way. We shouldn't make it that easy for them. There's not a pill for every problem, but for the pills that do need them, we are entitled to safe medications. We are entitled to drugs that won't increase our risk for suicide 12-fold or leave us paralyzed. We are also entitled to a drug industry that won't look at our children as an untapped market of customers. We are entitled to feel safe, protected, not falsely so. Even here in the United States of recovery, we are still entitled to true safety, not the illusion. Thank you.